From script to screen, every film is brought to life by visionary creatives and executives, all sharing one mission: to captivate the audience. Hosted by award-winning movie strategist Kevin Goetz, our podcast, Don't Kill the Messenger, offers a filmmaking masterclass through intimate conversations with Hollywood's most influential voices. And now, your host, Kevin Goetz.
As many of you know, test screening a movie is a work in progress. I mean, the editing, sound, music, and visual effects are often incomplete. We ask audiences to imagine the finished film, trusting that the technical elements will be polished by release. Depending on the film, those visual effects could range from massive spectacle to the most invisible kind of realism. In today's film world, visual effects aren't just about scale. They're about subtlety, nuance, and expanding the language of storytelling. In many cases, the audience doesn't even realize they're watching a visual effect, which of course is the point. My guest today is Scott Ross, widely recognized as one of the pioneers of visual effects, having led some of the most influential VFX teams in film history. Scott has helped define how visual effects evolved from a tool into a core part of cinematic storytelling. He's a leader, a disruptor, a visionary, and I'm very thrilled to have him as my guest here today. Scott, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it.
I have so many questions to ask. I'm going to start at the best place, the beginning. I want to know what the industry was like when you entered it, probably in the
early 80s.
I mean, it's about the most exciting time one could enter your field, correct?
Yeah, at the time, it was maybe 3 companies that were doing work like we were doing at Industrial Light and Magic. And it was coming off of Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And so Hollywood, in a lot of ways, as I'm sure you're quite aware, was turned upside down. So for all of these years, they were making these musicals and Bible stories and whatnot. And all of a sudden, this new thing came in called sci-fi. And sci-fi blew away everybody. People were around the block, as you recall, probably, at Grauman's and other major movie theaters around the United States. And the studios went, oh my God, there's this new thing in town. And so now it was something that everybody had to have. A big visual effects movie.
Absolutely. Let's go back to Hofstra.
Uh-huh.
You're a New Yorker like I am. You come from where, Long Island?
I was born in the South Bronx, and then I moved to Queens. And then
you 2 strikes now.
Yeah, I know. And then I went to undergraduate school at Hofstra.
So if I did my research correctly, you were a film major.
That I was.
And they didn't have film majors that often in 1974 or whatever.
That's correct. Early 1970s. So
you graduate as a film major. You didn't want to go into special effects. What did you want to do?
Well, actually, I didn't really want to go into film either. What I really wanted to do was keep my butt out of Vietnam. That's what I really wanted to do. And so at the time, I was a musician. I played in bands. And so I thought, how cool would it be to really be a music major? And then I get involved in music classes, and all these kids know 16th century counterpoint harmony and understand how to read bass clef and treble clef.
Not your jam.
And all I know is 1-4-5 progressions, and I'm singing the blues.
You're doing chords. You're not doing theory.
So I needed to get out. And the only thing that sort of made sense to me, I took a film class, was I love film. Why not major in film? And so that's where it all started.
You know, I think about a visual effect that is so embedded in my brain, which is the parting of the Red Sea and the 10 Commandments. And it's so laughable when you look at it, of course, now. And it was really cutting edge.
Absolutely.
At the time. Do you remember that?
Of course. Cecil B. So interestingly enough, a little bit of background. So at Industrial Light and Magic, when I got there, everything that was being done optically and chemically. There was no digital, right? So
what do you mean by that? Optically
models and miniatures and shot on celluloid film, generally VistaVision, which is 35 millimeter 8 perf. So the film moves from left to right as opposed to up and down. So you have a much bigger frame. And when I got there, all of the compositing, that means the layering of different levels of film being put together, was being done on what was known as an optical printer. So you took multiple film loops and you put them together and rephotographed them. And to your point, the major optical printer that we had at Industrial Light and Magic was the same optical printer on the Ten Commandments.
Wow. Wow.
That's how long that technology had been alive.
Well, the first visual effects started essentially when? Because I remember when I think about visual effects, I think of like car driving and rear screen projection, and it looks really fake.
Right. Jimmy Stewart sitting in a car bouncing around.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Except it's not like the Flintstones where there was the same thing that kept
Right.
going around and around
Right.
and around. But King Kong,
Mm-hmm.
when you look at those, what goes through your mind who've been through the genesis and the evolution of that?
So I'm a kid and I'm at the Ward Theater in the Bronx and I'm watching Flash Gordon. Black and white, really horrible visual effects, models and miniatures that are bouncing all over the place, scaled that doesn't work. But when I'm, 8 years old watching that, I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's great. I mean, I bought it. I bought it 100%. And the analog to that is I happened to be a roadie for a while and I worked for the Allman Brothers Band. And so I'm at the Fillmore and we're recording live at the Fillmore East. And I listened to that record and I think it's the greatest recording I've ever heard. And now when I listen to it today, it's totally compressed. It just doesn't sound anywhere near as digital recordings sound today. So over time, as the needle of time moves forward, what one thinks was perfect and great and believable no longer is, because things have changed.
So take me through what was revolutionary for its time. So let's go back to the 30s and 40s. Give me a movie.
We can go back even further.
Please.
We can go back to George Méliès's Trip to the Moon,
Oh, wow.
right?
So that was one of the first.
That's the first.
And what was it exactly?
There's a
That
picture of the
early?
moon, and the moon has a smile on its face, and this rocket ship comes across and slams into the moon.
It's iconic.
Or the shot of the Great Train Robbery, where all of a sudden we're on a train and the train's moving and there are people fighting, and that's all visual effects.
Did they call them visual effects artists at that time?
I'm not sure they did. I think they might have at that time confused it and called it special effects.
Got it.
Which
And-
is a difference.
And so what happens, say, as we move into the 40s and 50s? Give me another seminal movie.
Well, then King Kong and models and miniature and what's known as stop motion animation, where these...
Is that what they did with the ape
Yeah.
on the Empire State
Yep.
Building?
Mm-hmm.
It was actually like what we know as much more sophisticated stop motion.
Yeah. So they build this armature, and the armature has joints that where the ape's hands and legs and elbows would be, and then a rubber creature is put on top of it, and then you would move the hand and shoot a frame, and then move the hand a little bit more and shoot another frame, and then just play it at that time a lot faster. But the problem that you have is you have what's known as motion blur, right? So then stop-go motion was created. And go motion was a lot of like the Tauntaun in Star Wars, where Phil Tippett shoots go motion, where they make a frame, but they keep the aperture open to get blur, and it's moved by a mechanical device, or a hand is moving it and the aperture is open so you see the blur of the motion, and that's called go motion.
Who invented that?
Well, I don't know who invented it, but the person I think that was sort of like the maestro of it was Phil Tippett.
I thought you were going to say George Lucas.
No. His people invented stuff.
Industrial Light
He-
Magic.
He did until Disney bought it, correct.
And you ran it.
I did. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't Sid Ganis there?
Sid Ganis was the head of publicity, I believe, at Lucasfilm at the time. Lovely guy.
Oh, yeah.
Lovely.
He's one of my dudes.
Lovely guy.
He's one of my dudes.
I have a good Sid Ganis story.
What is it?
So what was happening is that Hunt for Red October, the director is John McTiernan, and John McTiernan loved Richard Edlund, who was a visual effects supervisor. And Richard Edlund used to be at ILM and then started his own company called Boss Films. And so the work was going on there, and John McTiernan was disappointed with the work.
What was he disappointed about?
The submarines weren't looking right. It wasn't what he envisioned. And so we get a call, and I speak to him, And I speak to the studio, which was Paramount at the time, and I'm told that we have the work. So we're shooting on what's known as VistaVision. I used to call John McTernan the optometrist director. John would be like, do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this? I get a call from the studio, and the production executive on the film, Lance Young, he calls me on the phone and he says, Scott, listen, the studio's not liking what John is doing. And so we'd like you to send a set of dailies to the studio and a set of dailies to John, and then we'll make the decision. And I said, well, you're my client, but you need to tell John that you're doing this. He said, oh, no, we're not going to do that.
Oh,
we're just going to have you send it. And I said, okay, so let me speak to Sid Ganis. And I get Sid Ganis on the phone, and Sid's like, there's no way we're going to do that. John's the director. In fact, we're going to pull in Ned Tannen, and Ned's going to oversee it, and we're not going to have this problem. And Scott, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. Thank you very much. So forever indebted to Sid Ganis.
Well, that's Sid Ganis.
Yeah.
That is a great story.
Yeah.
And it shows he's always trying to do the right thing, and he's very smart and trying to make everyone feel good.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Classy man. And Nancy, his wife, is another terrific,
classy gal.
Terrific gal.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about the names of the greats in the business. I and many of our listeners know Stan Winston, who you ultimately partnered with to start Digital Domain with Jim Cameron.
Correct.
Tell me the original greats. I want to know some of these names because I think it's important for particularly our young listeners to know who started this all.
Well, if you want to go back,
please.
Ray Harryhausen is one of the greats. He was the Optimus Prime, the guy that everybody looked up to back in the day, doing movies like Clash of the Titans, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts, all world-class stuff that even today visual effects people look at and go, that was the beginning. As things move along, Doug Trumbull is another one.
Doug Trumbull.
Yeah. May he rest in peace as well. And then visual effects supervisors like Dennis Murin and Kenny Ralston and people like that, Industrial Light and Magic people that are really pushing the envelope.
They were the stars there.
They were the stars there. Yes, correct. And then, when digital starts to come of age, then this whole new group of people that are looking at doing things differently start to really make waves.
Give me a date.
1987.
So we're still in the 80s. Sort of Jurassic Park.
Just a little before Jurassic. This is like The Abyss.
Which I worked on, and it was unbelievably fascinating, that underwater work.
Yeah. That was really the first time we get to see world-class computer graphics in a film that's somewhat important to the storyline.
Starting in the late 80s.
Yeah, starting in the late 80s, mid to late 80s.
That's incredible. By the way, wasn't Stan Winston, for example, known for more puppetry?
Yes, Stan was not a computer person at all. Stan was puppets and animatronics. So he would build these giant creatures that were all run by stepper motors, right? Another brilliant guy.
You were going to say.
So back in the day, there was a difference between film and video in terms of resolution. 2,000 lines of resolution means that the scan that goes across the screen, think of it as like your sheets that you buy.
Thread count.
Thread count. Exactly right. Exactly right. It's like thread count. And so the thread count on film was much higher.
The better
it is. Resolution. The thread count on video was much lower. So we were running around. We had a thing called Nike Net. So to be able to take data drives out of machines and transfer them to another machine, we would give it to a PA, and he would literally run from building to building. And that was the interface.
What was the first project you worked on where you were really convinced that you fell into the right career?
Yeah, I still have visions of wanting to be Mick Jagger,
I get it.
But I got swept up because I'm comfortable with technology. I'm comfortable with managing people, and I love creativity. I love putting teams together, and I can inspire folks. That's my secret weapon. the ability to be able to inspire folks.
You took one of my big questions, which you know, since you listened to the podcast. that
I did.
I asked, what is your superpower?
Right.
And the research that I've done is that you not only inspire people, but you also build cultures.
Culture's critical.
Culture's critical. Couldn't agree more. As a owner of my own company, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a seminal film for you.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us why.
Well, I came to Industrial Light and Magic not really knowing much about this optical stuff, this chemical stuff, shooting on film, because I came out of video post-production.
And that was Bob Zemeckis.
Yeah, Bobby Zemeckis. And I didn't really fully understand the process. And so that was my virgin run where I really started to understand, oh, okay, we shoot it on blue screen. And back then, and then we were on a sound stage in England.
Who told you to shoot on blue screen?
Well, this visual effects supervisor on the film was Ken Ralston.
Ah.
Yeah.
And worked very close with Bob.
That's correct. And Steve Starkey.
Now, you are a young guy. You're at ILM. And ILM had to bid on this, correct?
Yeah, we had to bid on everything.
And you won it because of inventing kind of this new technique of working with sort of the animation and live action?
We won it for a couple of reasons. As you well know, it's not about business, it's about personal things. So the personal relationship that Industrial Light and Magic had with Amblin was very, very deep. The relationship that we had with Zemeckis, with Bobby Z, was very, very deep, Cocoon, right? So there were these ongoing relationships that everybody felt comfortable with. And Kenny Ralston was the guy that had done other work with Bob Z. And so that was part of it. Now, that's not saying that we get the bid because of that. We're the front runner. And now it's about pricing, and now it's about capabilities. In terms of relationships, Industrial Light and Magic was the industry leader, but now it's all about pricing. And so you need to come in at a price that the producers and the studios feel comfortable with, and they never feel comfortable with anything.
Let me ask you a basic question. Why are visual effects so expensive?
They're really expensive because of the number of personnel needed to be able to produce the work.
Can you unpack that for us,
I'll give you
please?
an example. We were just talking earlier before the podcast, and I was talking about Electric State, and I'm looking at the credits in Electric State.
The new Netflix
film.
Film, which is purportedly a very expensive film.
$225 million or something like that. So as you look at each and every department, the departments are 10 people in the camera department, 8 producers, 5 people in the sound department, whatever it is, and 925 people in the visual effects department. That's going to change in a very, very big way.
That's the second half of our podcast. Do not think I'm not going there.
Okay, good.
So before we actually take a break, I want to talk about 2 greats that you've worked with, George Lucas, and get your thoughts on George, and Jim Cameron.
So the George Lucas relationship is a very quick and simple one. I ran Industrial Light and Magic.
How'd you get that job?
I was running one pass in San Francisco. They were looking for somebody to be head of operations. I interviewed with 45 people, including the receptionist, and somehow I passed mustard and I got the job. And then I moved up the ranks very quickly to become the general manager.
So you're a COO, essentially, hired as a COO.
Correct.
But then, did you ever actually work on the effects?
Nope.
So you personally never received the Academy Award?
No. So the analogy that I use is like asking Steve Jobs, did you actually program that Apple Macintosh? Did you wire the Macintosh?
I just had Mike Medavoy, as you know, several weeks ago, and I'm saying, Mike, you did this, and he kept saying, no, others did this. But I said, no, but you greenlit it. So I know, Scott,
that's the gig.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of the one that doesn't get the shiny object, literally, but you're behind it.
Yeah.
So, George.
I get a job at Lucasfilm. I'm director of operations. I become general manager of ILM. I ultimately become senior vice president, overseeing multiple divisions, including Skywalker Sound, THX, Lucasfilm Commercial Productions, etc.
You started a lot of those,
I
didn't
did.
you? Let's not give you that credit.
Thank you. And I only met George twice.
That's astounding.
In deference to George, I'm a huge fan of George Lucas and what he's done for the industry. I'm a huge fan of his movies, and he's an incredibly introspective, uncomfortable around people, and he just retreated.
Okay, Jim Cameron.
That's a horse of a different color. Jim Cameron is one of the greatest filmmakers that ever lived.
Maybe the best.
Yeah.
There's different levels of filmmaker because, of course, you've got your John Ford, right?
Sure.
And you've got your Steven Spielberg, and you have your Woody Allen on the other side. But Jim Cameron has found a lane where he's not only an extraordinary storyteller, but a visualist and a visionary. Tell us about him.
Well, what can I say? He was my partner. I wouldn't have been able to start Digital Domain had it not been for Jim Cameron.
Who
and
reached
Jim
out to
Cameron's
whom? How did that work?
I reached out to him.
And said?
There was a fellow that we were all friends with, and I was having a conversation with him. And he said, why don't you talk to Jim Cameron? Jim Cameron, I think, would be really interested in what it is you're trying to do. And so I've had a relationship with him through The Abyss and Terminator 2 at Industrial Light and Magic. So I reached out to him and told him about what I wanted to do with Digital Domain, and he was on board and excited.
Who was your third partner?
Stan Winston.
And how did you know Stan?
Well, it's a funny story. So, of course, I knew who Stan Winston was. And at Industrial Light and Magic, we had a really big creature shop. So we were in competition with Stan Winston. And Stan Winston and Rob Bottin were sort of the gold standard. They did the best work. So I knew of him. I had never met him. So I flew down from Northern California to Burbank to have a meeting with Jim to discuss this new fledgling company, where we were going to get our financing and what we were going to name it, et cetera, and refine the business plan. And I walk into Lightstorm Entertainment in Burbank, which used to be their headquarters, and in walks Stan Winston. And you got to love him. He's the kind of guy that would walk over you and give you a big kiss, give you a big hug, or tweak you in the places that you don't want to be tweaked. He was that kind of guy,
Yeah, fun.
Fun, really fun. Actually, we became very good friends. And so Stan sits down at the table, and what Stan was coming off of was Jurassic Park was such a big hit. But the stories that came out of Jurassic Park were all about Industrial Light and Magic.
How long were you at ILM?
I was there from the mid-1980s to 1992.
Okay, so 6 years in?
Yeah.
And when did you start Digital Domain? I'm trying to
1993.
Got it. So you went right into it.
Oh, yeah.
And how long were you at Digital Domain for?
11 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does it still exist?
It sure does.
You still own it?
No. We were, Jim, Stan, and I, and IBM and Cox were the equity shareholders, and we were bought out by this fellow named John Textor and Michael Bay. And then John Textor bankrupted the company, and in bankruptcy, the Chinese came in and bought it, and now the Chinese own it.
And that's how you live in Santa Barbara.
That's true.
Touche. Okay, so Jim and you and Stan start the company, and you're like now the new gold standard.
Well, because of the names attached, mostly Jim's name, we have this press conference at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills, and everybody shows up, and we're on the front page of the Hollywood Reporter, and we're on the front page of Variety. So it was not like this Chuchi-Puchik kind of company that starts. We have IBM as our investor, and we have Jim Cameron as the chairman of the company. So it was like right out of the stall, we're running at 100 miles an hour. And so now we have to prove ourselves. And because we're a brand new company, I have to hire people from all over the world. And I'm hiring people in an industry that's sort of brand new. So there aren't a lot of people.
So you had backing, you said, from
IBM
and Cox.
Later Cox.
So they gave you your seed money, basically your
Correct.
VC, to start this thing. How
Correct.
many initial employees did you need? You needed to staff up pretty quickly.
Very, very quickly. So the first number of employees were probably 10. We also had to find a location. We had to buy gear. We had to do all of those things. And pretty soon we were 150 people or 200 people.
What was your first movie?
The first movie was Color of Night. And then the second thing we did was we did something for Tim Burton. Stan and Tim were friendly. And so Tim started a new production company, and he wanted a logo for his production company. So we did a logo for Tim Burton. And then the next project we have is True Lies.
One of the best action sequences. I'm not sure. Did you attend test screenings?
I attended test screenings a bit. I wound up producing a movie called Secondhand Lions.
New Line, right?
It was New Line, correct. And so I was a producer on that film. So I would show up at some test screenings, and I learned a lot of what you guys do. And I'm so thankful for you.
Well, but let me ask you about True Lies. You didn't go to those test screenings?
No.
Okay, let me tell you about those.
Okay.
They were extraordinary. One of the greatest things that I learned, and the brilliance of Jim Cameron, was how each set piece, each action sequence was stronger and better than the one that preceded it.
So it grew.
So what are you going to, exactly. So what are you going to do at the end? And he tops it.
Right.
I thought it was just the perfect cadence whenever I used an example for years after that of how you needed to build upon. You can't have your strongest thing in the beginning and then you sort of dissipate as you go. And then even if you do that, your end set piece, your final set piece must be bigger than what preceded it.
Correct.
And he taught me that, and the audience responded in kind, and it was a massive success. I remember Tom Arnold and Jamie Lee Curtis, not only, of course, Schwarzenegger, but in those supporting roles, really just knocked it out of the park. Hey, listen, when we come back, I want to talk about where things are going and the future, because that is going to be very, very important for our listeners to hear. And also, I'm extremely curious as to what your take is. We'll be back in a moment. Listeners, the Motion Picture and Television Fund is a nonprofit charitable organization that supports working and retired members of the entertainment community. This wonderfully run organization offers assistance for living and aging with dignity and purpose in the areas of health and social services, including temporary financial assistance, case management, and residential living, and has been a crucial lifeline to thousands during and beyond critical times that our industry continues to experience. To learn more, visit mptf.com. Please join me in helping others in our industry during times of need. There are so many ways to offer support and get involved. Thank you. We are back with Scott Ross. Scott, I am fascinated by what you do and what you've created. I do want to call attention to your new book that just came out last December called Upstart, The Digital Film Revolution. In that book, you do mention the fear that everyone is talking about, and that is AI.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to expound a little bit and kind of tell us how AI lands with you when you hear the two letters.
Right.
What goes through your mind?
You know, AI is an incredibly wonderful technology that will revolutionize the way the world works. It will save thousands of lives, and it will make life even more enjoyable than it is. But it's a paradox. On the other hand, it's also really, really frightening and can do terrible things, will put lots of people out of work, and in the wrong hands could be incredibly destructive.
It's about the best definition I've heard. I was thinking of the word misunderstood as well, because everyone, including my own company, we're all scrambling to figure out how to use it.
Sure.
And what kind of data as inputs are relevant and meaningful. I want to talk about, with visual effects specifically, almost going back to the original nomenclature of special effects, because even putting words in someone's mouth, and that is very controversial right now, is happening. Does that fall under the visual effects department?
Well, if it's lip syncing animation, that would be animation.
Oh, I see. Even animation wouldn't fall under visual effects?
No, there are visual effects in animation, but animation is above that.
So if I'm doing that work and big set piece explosions and so forth, am I going to two different companies?
No. If there's a big set explosion, the set explosion is going to be done by a special effects team. If it's digital domain, chances are we're going to people that do pyro and special effects.
And they say, well, we also want to redo their voices with a different voice.
If you want to redo their voices, you would go to a company like Digital Domain or ILM or the other 10,000 companies now that are out there, and you would ask them probably to use artificial intelligence.
For the voice matching?
For the voice matching. and then you would go in and manipulate the image in 3D CGI to change the formation of their mouth and lips to match the new dialogue that you want to say.
Is that pretty easy to do?
It's generally done. It's not like a super special thing. It can be done in India, and it can be done relatively inexpensively. But it's specialized. I mean, we're not able to do it at home yet.
You would get asked, I imagine, to do character passes, say, on an actress who doesn't like her turkey neck. You might have to take that and smooth that out. Is that a visual effect?
Yes. There are actresses or actors that don't think they're as good looking as they need to be. And so we've had to do some beauty passes on them.
That just opened up a whole line of questioning for me. Going back to some of those stories, I heard, by the way, 300, a lot of the men weren't wearing things under their kilts.
Right, and certain things were showing.
There was a lot of ball removal.
Yeah. The Make-Believe Ballroom when we were kids. Do you remember that?
No.
No, it was a radio show. And as a 12-year-old, I thought it was hysterical.
So tell me about the threat that is imminent with AI in the visual effects world.
Okay.
What is first to be affected that we should be concerned about?
Are you using the universal we, or are you using the visual effects community we?
Visual effects community we.
Okay. So studios need visual effects in a very big way because, as you know, as probably as better than anyone else, that the international box office is now more important than domestic box office on major motion pictures. And so we know that movies like Driving Miss Daisy is not going to play in China. So what is it that allows international movies to play across international lines? And it's imagery. And so if it's imagery, what's going to put butts in the seat? It's going to be images that nobody's ever seen before. It's like Day After Tomorrow, or those kinds of images that excite people. They're going to want to see that. So in China or in Japan or in other countries around the world, and in America as well, visual effects are really critical to the success of box office. So as the cost of visual effects have gone up, basically because of the number of people needed, right? We talked about that. The studios have a hard time understanding why this stuff costs so much. Why does it cost so much? You, Scott Ross, you're probably making a ton of money. Aren't you driving a Rolls Royce? No, visual effects companies don't make money.
Do you drive a Rolls Royce?
I do not, no. Nor would I want to.
Okay, keep going.
So visual effects companies don't make money. And what's obvious is the number of visual effects that have gone bankrupt and closed over the last 10 years, which is extraordinary. Rhythm and Hues, now Technicolor and MPC, and et cetera, et cetera.
And because the margins are so low, they keep getting driven down of cost cutting?
Yeah. So now, because there's no money to be made.
So it's not scalable is what you're saying at the end of the day.
Well, till now. So because visual effects are people that have to figure out how to make the impossible possible, they're faced with this issue of how do I continue to compete and bring my prices down? Then add on top of that the unbelievable tax subsidies and subsidies that's happening around the world. Now, the tax subsidies and subsidies do not inure to the benefit of the visual effects company. They wind up inuring to the benefit of the studio. So now a studio comes to a visual effects company, which, by the way, costs millions and millions and millions of dollars to be able to facilitate, buy the equipment, get the people in place, et cetera, that the studio comes and says, you know, if you want this job, you really need to do it in Vancouver, or you need to do it in Montreal, or you need to do it in London, or now you need to do it in Australia.
And they want a tax break on the whole kit and caboodle.
Correct.
So that means you have to physically have your plant there.
Correct. So now on a hardly any margin basis business, you need to now open up a new facility in London. Now you do, and it costs you millions and millions of dollars. So the margins just got even skinnier. And then when you add to that, you have to move some of your key people there and put them up because the talent base isn't there. Now it costs even more. And then all of a sudden, the UK, which is giving you 20%, Australia says, we're going to give you 30%. And so now you've got to build a facility in Australia. So it's a race to the bottom.
Wow.
So what happened in the aughts was, because visual effects people try to make the impossible possible, they recognized that a large portion of their overhead and costs were personnel. So they said, let's open up facilities in countries where the cost of living is significantly less than the cost of living in the United States. And all of a sudden, we saw many, many, many visual effects facilities open in India. In fact, there are probably 20,000 or more visual effects workers that work in India. And if you saw Mustafa, 90% of the work on Mustafa was done in India. So now we have this overhead in India, but we have to compete against each other. And I use the analogy of airlines. So if you own an airline and you have 100 planes and you have all of the infrastructure needed for that airline, and you figure out that it costs you $100 for every seat on that plane, you need to charge $100 to break even. But all of a sudden your competitor's charging 90 or 80 or 70. It's better for the company to charge $70 because if my planes sit on the ground, I'm getting $0. So the industry has been eating itself over and over and over, driving things further and forcing bankruptcies. And that was what happened during the aughts and the early 2010s. And then this new thing comes along, and it's called artificial intelligence.
Before we go there, I just want to comment an aside here about test screenings where we'll test things where the visual effects are pretty incomplete.
Raw.
And I always say to the heads of the studios, and I mean no disrespect to your industry, but I say, test it. And let's see, you may want to cut that sequence.
Sure.
You'll be saving an enormous amount of money.
Sure.
You know, even animation. What does animation cost? About $1 million a minute?
Correct.
Is the general sort of way we talk about it. I can only imagine, is there an average, like when you talk about a special effects, even in terms of seconds, what a complete rendering of a
shot?
Yeah. What does it cost?
So it depends what the shot is. $5,000 a shot to, I've been as high as $120,000 a shot.
And a shot being
5 to 10 seconds.
Wow. That's a huge spread.
So driving the price down is critical. The studios want it faster and cheaper and faster and cheaper and faster and cheaper. And so when AI comes around and is capable of doing, at first, all of the roto, matte, painting, compositing work, all of those people will lose their jobs. And those visual effects workers, they're, you know, if I said there were 20,000 of them in India, I don't know how many there are in the world. A lot of those people will lose their jobs. My take is 75% of the visual effects workers around the world will lose their jobs to artificial intelligence. And then as artificial intelligence becomes generative AI, right? So it now is more salient and has the ability to create, and I think it will have the ability to create, it cuts even further. Now here's the good news, because there's a paradox.
Good news.
The good news is that just like when cameras move from giant Mitchell blimped 35 millimeter cameras, of which there were X number in the entire world, and if you wanted to make a feature film, you needed to have access to it, that has now been replaced with fairly democratized technology. So you can shoot a movie now really with your iPhone. So what's going to happen is the whole ability to be able to craft films will become much more democratized, and therefore a lot more people will have access to those technologies. And now the question is whether they have the talent and skill sets to create art. But the throughput, the impedance factor of being able to get to a studio, to have a conversation with Sid Ganis, or to have a conversation with Michael Ovitz, to get the talent, that's going to go away. And the ability for these filmmakers, hopefully creative filmmakers, they will have access to tools that will allow them to create images that look as good, if not better, than the images we've seen today.
I'm going to ask you, it's kind of a fun little round. I'm going to throw out some names of movies. I just want you to give me a one-line answer on what you remember from a visual effects standpoint from those.
Assuming I saw them.
Well, you've worked on them. And under your tutelage, you've won, I think, 7 competitive Academy Awards, as well as Sci-Tech Awards under your watch. So the first one I want to ask you about is Apollo 13.
The movie I most enjoyed working on in my entire life.
Why?
First of all, you have a director who is comfortable in his clothes. He is not second guessing you. He's like, I remember he walked over to Rob Legato, who's the visual effects supervisor, and the Saturn V liftoff. And Rob said, "So what do you want me to do here?" And Ron Howard said, "Make it look like Marty Scorsese shot it." And that was it. And Rob and the team went away and they delivered it. And Ron said, "You nailed it."
I don't even know what that means.
The movement and close-ups and, sort of a Marty Scorsese sensibility, right?
In that case, I guess I didn't know. But speaking of Ron Howard, what about Cocoon?
Any Ron Howard film is a joy because Ron Howard is a joy. And Cocoon, hell of a cast, a great story, a tearjerker. Now that I'm going to turn 74 this year, I keep looking for that boat and those eggs.
The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
I've known David Fincher since David Fincher was a boy, and I love him. Incredibly talented, absolutely beautiful movie. It was a real challenge because that was the first time really you needed to create a computer-generated human being that was believable of a very famous person. It's one thing if you're creating a computer-generated version of somebody we've never met, but if it's somebody that's really famous, we know what he looks like, that's a super challenge.
Is it difficult to de-age someone?
Less so today than it was back at Benjamin Button's because of AI.
Of AI?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does AI help do that?
So the way AI works generally is it goes through all of the possible internet capabilities and reaches out and pulls in data and information. Have you seen Here?
Oh, yeah.
So if you give this AI, and it was a company called Metaphysic AI that did it, if you give them photographs of every shot that Tom Hanks had ever had, of every age that he's ever been.
Oh, my Lord.
And then you ask the AI to, okay, now make him 22 or 18. It has the ability to do that.
Incredible. Moving on to Titanic.
Hey, Gewalt.
Mir.
Yeah, really.
I worked on that in the day.
Yeah, me too. Titanic. Probably the pinnacle of my career, the most famous movie I ever worked on. I always feel like I have imposter syndrome. So like when I'll travel around the world and I'll give lectures, particularly in Asia, Japan, Korea, and China, when they realize that my company worked on Titanic, I'm a superstar. And I always feel badly because I actually didn't do the work, as we talked about before.
Well, I just said I worked on it. I tested it.
You actually tested it.
I tested it.
Right.
When I say I worked on a movie, that's the extent to
Well, that's
which I
your
worked
work.
on a movie. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's your work. So did I actually operate the machinery? Did I actually, sit in the screening room and saying, no, fix that? No, I didn't do any of that. I was the person caught in the middle between Jim Cameron and 20th Century Fox to
John
answer.
Landau.
Oh, and
May he rest in peace.
May he rest. Who, by the way, I knew since he was 9 years old.
Wow.
Because John Landau's brother, Les, and I were good friends
And I
at
knew
Hofstra
John
University.
for 35 years,
Yeah.
something like that. His death was so tragic.
Tragic.
And I haven't seen Julie around in a
I
while.
haven't spoken to her.
should
I
reach out.
tried to reach out to Les. I haven't heard back. But I did reach out to John as he was on his dying bed, and we did have a text conversation and an email conversation.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
So is the gift that keeps on giving.
It is the gift that keeps on giving. It is one of the most, I think, in my opinion, and maybe because I was too close to it, is that it's the most iconic movie that Jim Cameron has ever made, including the Avatar series. It touched the heart. I met people that have seen that movie over 30 times, which is just unbelievable.
Yeah. I want to mention a movie that I worked on, tested, that I thought narratively was very slow and plodding, but it was one of the most interesting visual feasts I'd ever seen on film, and that is What Dreams May Come.
Yeah. So What Dreams May Come was interesting for us. I knew we were going to win the Academy Award on that.
How could you not?
I knew we were. And I kept telling my staff, we're going to win. And they were like, I don't think so. I forget who we were against at the time. But Vincent Ward is the director of the film. And Vincent Ward is nothing but an incredibly great visualist. Not a great storyteller, not a great scriptwriter, but an incredible visualist. And that film just tears you apart.
Insane.
Yeah.
Terminator 2.
Similar kind of thing. Terminator 2, working with Cameron again and pushing the envelope, and, Steve Williams, and known as Spaz, and Mark
How did
DePay,
you do that metallic?
the computer-generated person going through the bars. Yeah. It's magic. I'd have to kill you if I told you.
Oh, my Lord. I mean, it was so cutting edge, and it still looks great.
I knew that Terminator 2 was going to be the hit that it was. We went to a test screening, and when the visual effects played, the oxygen level in the audience went down because everybody went, Same thing with Jurassic Park, by the way. That was the same feeling.
You didn't work on Jurassic,
Well,
did you?
I was running ILM through all of Jurassic Park until Jurassic Park was to be released, and then I left and started Digital Domain.
I must confess I voted for a movie this year that did not win, and that is Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
I mean, this is how you know you have a great film. In the test screening process, you have Andy Serkis next to the dotted, what do they call those green dots?
Motion face capture.
Motion face capture mask. They're actually standing next to each other.
And he's doing this and it's doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you contorting his face is what Scott was just doing. And you're like, where do I look? But you look at Andy Serkis.
Yeah.
And you see the emotion. And the scores initially were so strong with all of that pre-visual effects work. It was extraordinary. So you say, that's how good the narrative is, the story. The visual effects are always there in service of the narrative.
The statement should be, if I could correct you, visual effects should always be there to support the narrative. It should always be there, but sometimes it's not.
That's exactly what I meant, and so glad that you just said that.
Yeah, sometimes it's not.
So glad you said that. Because I always talk about the art of filmmaking takes many extremely talented people for the making of a movie. It's not one person. Yes, it's a director's vision or a producer's vision, but it is not the end-all be-all. You cannot not have great craftspeople in art direction, production design, visual effects, editing, blah, blah, blah.
It's the most collaborative art form ever.
Which is maybe why we love it.
Yeah. And if you're a director and you understand that collaboration and you're willing to give and you're willing to take and you're willing to inspire, you wind up getting great work.
Because of the advent of AI, it's kind of a trite question in a way, but I really do want to ask this as sort of my last question, which is the young person coming into the world today with the advent of AI and knowing jobs are going to be lessened. What would you say to
my grandson who wants to be in visual effects?
Does he want to be in visual effects?
He's too little, but I think that's the question.
Grandpa, should I go into visual effects?
Let me tell you, little Kev, are you good at baseball?
Listen, Scott Ross, thank you so much. Your new book, Upstart, The Digital Film Revolution, is out now. If you're interested in this subject, I urge you to read it. It's a terrific read. And I thank you for not only everything you've done, but for paving the way for so many of the great films that we know and love and for making them memorable in their visual style.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed our interview today. I encourage you to read Scott's book, Upstart, available on Amazon. For more filmmaking and audience testing stories, I invite you to check out my book, Audienceology, at Amazon, or through my website at kevingetz360.com. You can also follow me on my social media. Next time on Don't Kill the Messenger, I'll welcome one of the pioneers of the total talent agency concept, veteran agent and producer Arnold Rifkin. Until then, I'm Kevin Goetz, and to you, our listeners, I appreciate you being part of the movie-making process. Your opinions matter.